So our primary focus for the beginning of this unit is really looking at the term monsters and what that actually means. And so I'm going to read to you guys this article called The Monsters in My Head, which should give you guys kind of this opening and um, into what the term monsters can really relate to and mean. So I'm going to read through this. While I read through it, I would suggest opening up the questions for the monsters inside my head assignment on Google Classroom, um, so that maybe you can complete these as we go through the article. I will pause and kind of speak out of turn away from the article about some of these questions, so this would be pretty helpful. And you can pause this video as we go and jot some stuff down. Okay. The Monsters in My Head by Frank Langla. I was sure he was coming to get me. First, a hard step on the gravel, and then a foot dragging behind. Step drag, step drag. I lay frozen in my bed. The long alleyway between our family house and the neighbors was hardly 3 feet wide. Dark, covered with black dirt, gravel, and tufts of weed, and grass just barely able to survive the sunless space. The two windows of my room faced the clapboard wall of our neighbor's house, and Venetian blinds remained permanently closed against the non-view. It was the mid-1940s. I had just seen a movie about a mummy. I don't remember the name of it. Just the image, so powerful even still, of a man wrapped in grayish clothes around his ankles, legs, body up to the top of his head. Eyes and mouth exposed, one arm drawn up against his chest, elbow close to his side, hand clawed, the other arm dangling alongside the leg that dragged. Several strips of cloth hung loosely from that arm, swaying with each step drag, step drag. I don't remember where he was coming from or going to in the movie. It doesn't really matter. I knew that he was coming for me. For so many nights I heard him as I lay alone in my bed. My heart pounded as I waited for the good foot to land. A pause, then the slow drag. I would get up from the bed, pull the blind a little as I could get away from the glass, and, with my chin just a little over the window ledge, I would stare hard into the dark alley. There were no outdoor lights, so I never could see him clearly. But he was there. He stopped when he saw me. I would get back into bed and wait. He usually left. Sometimes I fell asleep and he returned, waking me. Other nights he spared me and moved on. I never told anyone about him. I don't know why. Shame, I suppose. It was that he seemed to be my private terror, and as much as I was frightened of him, I was also frightened of losing him. Okay, so here's the writer, and he's giving us this description of this terrifying mummy, right? He just went and saw a scary movie, and I'm sure we've all had that, especially when we were younger, where you saw a movie and you just your fear overtakes you, right? And so here he is, he's just petrified of this mummy that he saw in the movie, and he feels like it's everywhere. That he can hear it around him, right? And clearly he's not going to tell anybody that he's afraid of a mummy, considering mummies don't actually come to life, and that would be ridiculous. But here he is, right? Terrified of this mummy. One night, the mummy deserted me forever, and I was not to think of him again for 40 years, until my own son, this year at age 4, began calling out in the night, "Daddy, Daddy, there's a monster in my room, come kill him." His room, several floors above the street, looks out over a New York alleyway to a brick wall. The windows are covered with overt shutters. I found him sitting up in bed, eyes wide, staring at the tilted louvers, pointing at his monster. "He's coming in the window, Daddy, he's going to get me." I grabbed a pillow and I did a dutiful daddy fight with the monster, backing him up against the closet door, beating him toward the shutters, leaping onto the window seat and driving him back out into the night. He was a sizeless, faceless creature to me. My son told me he was blue with big teeth. This ritual went on for weeks, sometimes several times a night. I continued my battle, and as I tucked him back under the covers, I explained that Daddy would keep the monster from him always. I was bigger and stronger. As long as I was there, no monster was going to get my boy. I was wrong. No matter how hard I battled, the monster returned when my son wanted him to. I was forced to accept the fact that my macho approach to protecting him from his fears wasn't working. My dad never told me he would save me from my monsters. I don't think he knew they existed. So here he is, right, years later, and he has his own son, and and as many of us did, we went through a phase, right, where we thought that there were monsters under our bed or in our closets, right? And so, here he is being the dad, and he's going in and he's pretending to fight this monster in hopes that this is going to help his son overcome his fear, but it's not working. Okay. Um, and as we read on, we're kind of looking at this like, you know so why can't the dad protect his son from this imaginary monster, right? As I thought back to my mummy and his eventual disappearance, I realized that he had never really gone away. He was with me still. He changed shapes as rapidly as I grew up. He became a wild bear at the foot of my bed, then later an amorphous flying object swooping over my head. In later years, he was my first day at kindergarten, the agony of my early attempts at the diving board. He was hurricanes in the ocean and mysterious death next door to us, my brother's ability to outdo me in all sports. He was hypodermic needles, even early haircuts. Still, later, my first date, my first night away from home, at 16 alone in a small boarding house and as an apprentice in summer stock, the first woman to say no, the first woman to say yes, and then he became my ambition, my fear of failure, struggles with success, marriage, husbandhood, fatherhood. There's always a foot dragging somewhere in my mind, it seems. So here he is making this realization, right? That this terrifying mummy that haunted him, um, you know, for a while in his life never actually went away. That fear that he felt took different forms, right? And they took forms that were really kind of real life things, right? He says things like, um, his first day at kindergarten, right? Um, that fear of going to school for the first time, um, jumping off the diving board, right? Having a fear of maybe heights or water. Um, and so, he's saying that the he never got rid of fears of things, right? You're always going to be afraid of something. So this, he said, I might not have been afraid of the mummy anymore, but I had all of these other fears, these very real fears, right? Um, Needles, haircuts, um, struggles with success, marriage, right? Like these are very real fears that he has in comparison to his first fear of this, movie mummy. Um, my son called out again. This time I went into his room and turned on the light and sat down facing him. His eyes were wild with fear, wilder than the earlier nights we had gone through this ritual. I asked him to listen, but he couldn't hear me. He kept screaming and pointing at the windows. Kill him for me, Daddy, he cried. He grabbed the pillow and tried to get me to do my routine. I felt I needed to speak to him without the rituals having happened first. When at last I could quiet him, I said, with trembling voice, that I was never going to kill the monster again. I explained that this was his monster. He had made it up, and only he could kill him. I told him that the monster was in his head and leapt out whenever he wanted to. I said that he could make him go away whenever he chose, or that he could turn him into a friendly monster if he liked. He sat expressionless. He had never stared at me so hard. I said again that I would no longer perform this particular battle for him, but that I loved him and I would always love him. A slow and overwhelmingly beautiful smile that I shall never forget came to his face, and he said, You mean I can make him do anything I want? Yes, I said. You're in charge of him. So he realizes, right, that he can't always be there to help his son fight his battles or, stave off these fears that he might have, because this monster that he has now that's coming through the window is just going to change into other real fears. And, you know, your parents aren't always going to be there to fight your battles for you, right? So he gives his son this really great piece of advice, and he says, you know what? He goes, only you can kill him, right? And he also says, you can, he goes, You can make him go away whenever you want. You could turn him into a friendly monster, right? He says, you're in charge of him, right? You can do this. You need to take charge, is really what he's saying here, right? That's what he's telling his son he needs to do, is he needs to take charge of his own monsters. So that later in life, as he grows up, he has the ability to fight his own battles/monsters. I went back to bed and lay there waiting for the return of the monster. He didn't come back that night and has never again appeared in that form. Sometimes he's being driven from the living room by my son with his He-Man sword aloft, its scabbard stuck down the back of his pajamas as he cries out, "I am the power." And sometimes he is under the covers in the big bed when the whole family plays tent. We just ask him politely to leave. He stays for dinner now and then. He's everything from 10 feet tall to a small, tiny creature in the cup of my son's hand. He's blue, green, and sometimes he's a she. As my son grows, I know we will be able to face his monsters together. And now, when all I was once so sure of has become a mystery to me, I'm hoping he'll be able to help me face the unknown ones yet to visit themselves upon me. So the author ends with this idea of, you know, he can't fight his son's battles for him. People can't fight your battles for you. They can help you, right? He says we'll be able to face his monsters together. So there's that idea that you don't always have to face your battles alone, but people aren't going to fight them for you. And so that's really kind of like this big kind of overarching message here. So I want you to really think, based on this article, what does the term monsters really seem to be referring to? Since we know that, the mummy, the monster that the child describes isn't real, right? What does monsters refer to? And that is the last question on that sheet. So I'm going to leave you to answer that, and please turn it in on Google Classroom. Let me know if you have any questions or need any help with anything.